You have the daunting task at George Washington University, an outstanding institution, I might add. You have the daunting task, Doug, of looking at training people for careers in business and being able to connect them with a city that they hopefully will work in. So where do you see our opportunities to expand this economy?
The first thing I would say is that, first of all, I really commend the framing of the question as really thinking about cross-industry strategic industrial development. But I want to disagree a little bit with the idea that we should be moving away from manufacturing. We are fundamentally a services economy. As you mentioned, of course, the government procurement is a $67 billion business in this area. It's got a lot of richness to it. But there are two areas that I would like to see the district move in the direction of, and I'm going to use two other cities as examples that have worked very well in this sector. Let me preface this by saying the reason I think we can't walk away from manufacturing is when you cite statistics of the 30% of unemployment in Ward 7 or 8, these are people that I think would do well and benefit tremendously from actually having a manufacturing sector move back to the city. And there are cities that have done well in rebuilding themselves in new manufacturing areas. So the first that you mentioned was healthcare. Now, the city of Pittsburgh, after it was decimated from the loss of steel jobs in the 1970s and 1980s, they looked around the city and saw what was the largest employer in the city. It happened to be the University of Pittsburgh Health Center. But they didn't seek to build a city that was built around doctors. They sought to build a city that was built around the ancillary industries that support that. So they built in areas of healthcare technologies, of healthcare machinery, of robotics, in areas that were actually manufacturing jobs that would then support that thriving industry. Those are jobs, they're skilled labor jobs, so we would need to invest in vocational education to get people there, but they're really important jobs to build an economy around.
Where do we do that? Where do we make those investments in? I'll call it career and technical education, so we have 21st century technology. But you're absolutely right, it is vocational education, vocational training. Where in the city should that happen?
I mean, I believe that it should happen where the joblessness is suffering the greatest amount of pain. People need training in Wards 7 and 8.
Who in a leadership capacity to make that happen?
Well, I mean, I think the D.C. Community College probably has the ability to take a leadership role on that, but it needs to be a much more concerted effort that has high-level thinking at the policy level for high school education, because I think vocational education has to occur at the high school. And I would just caution on the use of career training, because vocational technical education has replaced vocational education, because I think that there was a movement in the 70s and 80s to make that move, but a lot of what was lost was the actual skilled labor training in high schools at that time. The one other city, I like your referring earlier to renewable energy. I think the city of Chicago has done a great job at attracting Excelon and SunPower to actually build photovoltaic arrays in the south side of Chicago that created a tremendous amount of jobs, not just in the building of those arrays, but also in the service and maintenance of them. And so I actually think that that LEED certified buildings are great, but we could be building a manufacturing sector in this space and really become a leader in the national economy.
Where do we do that in a city with so little land mass?
I mean, here again, I would assume that there is enough land base in places in parts of the city where the joblessness is suffering the most, and so I would think east of the river would be a great opportunity to develop some of those areas, and it would bring jobs and services to that economy.
How do you get people to think differently about an area of the city that's 25% of our geography, 140,000 people? Doug?
So I want to just give one more example of a city that did do this successfully in terms of changing perception. The city of Cleveland in the 1980s suffered similarly to a lot of other cities in the northern manufacturing industrial belt. And in 1982, McKinsey came in with a report that really pushed forward Cleveland Tomorrow. That was the business organization's community, the business community's organization that really drove forward a kind of local economic nationalism of investment in Cleveland, but it wouldn't have worked with Cleveland Tomorrow alone. That same year, the Ford Foundation funded an organization called the Local Initiative Support Corporation that then funded 50 community development corporations around the city that then became this very lively intersection of public-private partnerships in which you had the banks with the local development tax credit, You had corporations investing, and you had community development corporations actually taking ownership of that process. And when the entire community actually got excited about and really enlivened around the redevelopment of resources in that area, I think you had a very, very exciting time for economic development.
What was the key dynamic that changed the course?
I think the key dynamic was leadership from the corporate sector and from the local nonprofit sector, and with some funding from the philanthropic world. And when you brought those three resources together, right, and then had leadership from the government really pushing this forward, I think it just changed the entire dynamic. And I think we have the opportunity to do that.
You know what's interesting in your answer? I didn't hear government anywhere, and maybe there's some truth to that. The question that we continue to grapple with: what is the role of government in all of this? And you said the corporate sector, you said the philanthropic sector, and you said the nonprofit sector. None of which really is directly a part of government. Doug, from the perspective of a of a business school in the city, one strength, one weakness.
So our greatest strength, I think, is that the Washington, D.C. is a national symbol. It cannot be the case that the D.C. economy is as distressed as it is, and I think you can leverage that to actually get a little leeway with the federal government to be very attractive to investors, and particularly foreign investors. If you take, for example, the case of Huawei, which was recently, the deal that they were trying to buy Three-Leaf was recently shut down by the federal government. These guys need a presence in Washington, D.C., if only because they need to change the perception of themselves as a global corporation. There's a current account balance sitting over there on $2 trillion of U.S. treasuries that need to make their way back into the U.S. economy. And you have an opportunity, I think, to, just because we are D.C. and because companies need to have a presence here from around the world, and because it has to be such a national symbol, I think that there's an opportunity to make very bold arguments that people and mayors of other cities can't necessarily make. The obstacle, I would, to get a little abstract here, and I apologize, but I think that there is just the collective action problem of capitalism. I think that we don't push our business leaders enough to think about what it means to, all things being equal, they should be here. They should be helping businesses here. And I think you said a few minutes ago that you asked what the government's role is, and I love the idea of the government as convener. The government is the bully pulpit. The government is the case, that is the organization that can make the case that this is what we have to do because it's right. And so I think that obstacle, without that kind of argument, the obstacle is just the fact that capital will flow where it's cheapest to flow, and that's not where we want it to go.